These are Sermons from the Mount. Mount Gambier Catholic Parish, that is. This is the Sunday Gospel and our short reflection on it. I pray the Word of God bring each of us closer to Jesus, the Word made flesh. The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. After Jesus had been born at Bethlehem in Judaea during the reign of King Herod, some wise men came to Jerusalem from the east. "Where is the infant King of the Jews?" they asked. "We saw his star as it rose and have come to do him homage." When King Herod heard this, he was perturbed, and so was the whole of Jerusalem. He called together all the chief priests and the scribes of the people and inquired of them where the Christ was to be born. "At Bethlehem in Judaea," they told him, "for this is what the prophet wrote. And you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, you are by no means least among the leaders of Judah. For out of you will come a leader who will shepherd my people Israel." Then Herod summoned the wise men to see him privately. He asked them the exact date on which the star had appeared and sent them on to Bethlehem. "Go and find out all about the child," he said, "and when you have found him, let me know, so that I too may go and do him homage." Having listened to what the king had to say, they set out. And there in front of them was the star they had seen rising. It went forward and halted over the place where the child was. The sight of the star filled them with delight, and going into the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary. And falling to their knees, they did him homage. Then, opening their treasures, they offered him gifts of gold and frankincense and myrrh. But they were warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, and returned to their own country by a different way. The Gospel of the Lord. Let's talk about King Herod for a moment. So, first thing to note, in the Gospels there are two Herods. There's Herod the Great, who's king right around the time of Jesus' birth, and then there's his son, Herod Antipas. He appears in the latter parts of the Gospel. He's the one who puts John the Baptist to death and who's there present during Jesus' own condemnation to death. So, Herod the Great. Called great not because he was morally great, but because he was a great builder. He did a big construction of the Jewish temple in Jerusalem. He built a city called Caesarea Maritima, and he built a fortress called Masada. That's why he's called great. But in actual fact, Herod was a puppet king. He was installed by the Romans and was given authority through the strength of Caesar Augustus. Interestingly as well, Herod wasn't Jewish. He was Idumean. It kind of meant that they were like cousins to the Jewish people. But it meant that Herod was always a bit paranoid because he'd been given the Jewish people to rule over while he himself was not Jewish, which meant that a lot of people didn't acknowledge his authority. And that paranoia was something that would accompany him all through his life. To strengthen his claim to the throne, the woman he married belonged to the ruling family who had been deposed by the Romans. But, due to his paranoia, he thought that his wife and his sons were plotting against him, so he had them executed. Lovely, right? It actually led to Caesar Augustus giving a little play on words about King Herod. So in Greek, the word for pig is hus, and the word for son is huios. And Emperor Augustus is supposed to have said that it is better to be Herod's hus than his huios. Better to be his pig than his son. Well, the reason why is because Jewish people don't slaughter pigs. and Herod clearly slaughters sons. Herod the Great. Well, look at what happens. We hear about these wise men who are following the star and who probably have some sense of the Jewish prophecies from the time when the Jewish people were in exile in Babylon. They've obviously left their mark there in the east, and now when this star rises, these three wise men, they make their move. They find in this the fulfillment of Jewish prophecy. But if you were going to look for the newborn King of the Jews, where would you naturally start? Well, the capital, fair enough, let's go to Jerusalem. And then whose door would you knock on? The king, surely. Wouldn't the newborn King of the Jews be one of the sons of Herod? Well, perhaps that's what's going through the minds of the three wise men. And so they ask to see this newborn King of the Jews. And let's remember that Herod's somewhat paranoid. He's the King of the Jews. And now they're asking about a newborn? Well, this obviously sets off Herod. And we can see that if he's willing to murder his own sons, it's not outside the realm of possibility that he's more than prepared to send his soldiers into Bethlehem and to put aside every child under the age of 2. Better to be Herod's pig than his son. Well, what are we presented with? In the gospel, we're given a very clear contrast between Herod, the King of the Jews, and Jesus, the King of the Jews. When is Jesus going to be proclaimed openly and broadly as the King of the Jews? It's on Good Friday. It's as he hangs upon the cross with a crown of thorns around his head that the title is nailed by Pontius Pilate that Jesus the Nazarene is the King of the Jews. And to double the effect, it's written in Latin and Greek as well as Hebrew. Here is now the contrast between Herod and Jesus. Herod is willing to kill in order to manifest himself as the King of the Jews. And he's even willing to kill his own sons. But what does Jesus do instead? That his reign is not one about murder, but one about life. He's actually willing to lay down his life so that others might become the sons and daughters of the Father. And so I suppose on this feast of the Epiphany, we're presented with these two contrasting kings, and we're invited to place our loyalty with one of their reigns. The three wise men, when they come to do Jesus homage, they acknowledge his kingship, and what we see manifest is the eruption of God's kingdom in the world and the gift of this new king who will exercise his power not for himself but for us. And so I suppose the invitation we're made is, to which kingdom do we belong? To whom do we owe allegiance? We know about Herod that it's better to be his king, it's better to be his pig than his son. But for Jesus, he turns everyone who belongs to his kingdom into a son or daughter, into a son or daughter of the Father. And it's to him that we belong. Thanks for joining us for this Sunday's Gospel. May God bless you for the week ahead.